But where are you really from?
A podcast about the Asian American struggle.
Hello.
Hi there. We should introduce the podcast.
Okay, well, this podcast is all about cultural identity and specifically the identity of being an Asian American, kind of stuck in the middle of not quite that Asian, not quite American enough, and kind of all the different topics and struggles that could be interesting to talk about through the lens of having grown up being caught in both worlds.
Yeah. I think that's 100% on point. And I think we wanted to share this with you guys to showcase how we've traversed this very particular and unique identity as we've grown up.
Cool. All right. Well, now you know what this is, but you don't know who we are yet. So we can do a quick introduction. My name is Angela Lynn. I live in San Francisco. I'm 29. I work in marketing. I think that's it.
And I'm Jesse. I live in New York. My ages, I will never tell any of you. And I also work in advertising.
And Jesse didn't mention this, but his last name's also Lynn. And just so you guys know, related. We might as well be related. I wish we were, but we are not. Our relationship is that we've been pretty much best friends since we were like 5 years old. Maybe. Yep. So blood runs deep here. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then last thing about in this intro section, Jesse already kind of mentioned partially why we wanted to start this podcast. Obviously, we want to just share our perspective of everything we've gone through and how we see the world based on, you know, the upbringing we've had and the influences we've had with being Asian American. But I think for me, at least, there are definitely selfish reasons I wanted to start this podcast too. Starting any podcast is something I've been really interested in for a while, but didn't really want to take the leap and dare to do it. But then, you know, the world where it's at right now, we're in the middle of this crazy coronavirus quarantine, and it just felt like now or never. Like, what else are you doing? You might as well, right?
That's exactly right.
Any other reasons you really wanted to start this podcast besides boredom and sharing your perspective?
Yeah, I know. I think it's something really interesting to think about in terms of your identity. And usually on your day-to-day, you don't get enough time to do this kind of introspection. So as you mentioned, now that we have the time, I think it's a really great exercise to try to get to understand ourselves better.
Cool. Okay. I think that wraps up intro.
Awesome.
So I think the only thing anyone's talking about nowadays is the fucking coronavirus.
Yep.
So naturally, I think a good place to start is, how are you holding up?
That's a really good question. I think my mental health is slipping slightly because, you know, I haven't seen like another person in about a week.
Yeah.
Like in real life, which is pretty crazy. And actually, like, a lot of companies and stuff shut down like this week or last week, but I have been working from home since Friday, March the 6th, and it is now March the 23rd. So I have been at home by myself for quite a while. With
March 6th?
Yeah, with my cat and wine.
Wait, now I'm like, when did I start? I might have started around then. I feel like, just to add on to yours, I have no sense of time anymore.
Yeah.
Like every day, every week has started to blend in together. Yeah. Like, I swear to God, last week, when the weekend rolls around, I was like, wasn't yesterday the weekend? There's no delineation between weekday and weekend anymore.
Yeah, precisely. And especially since we're all like working from home now, there's like no separation of like anything. It's just one long, endless Groundhog's Day. Yeah, it's like driving me crazy.
I'm in my PJs just all day, every day, weekend or weekday, whatever hour of the day. So that definitely doesn't help with having separation between work and life.
Yeah, I mean, I still like get ready. I don't get dressed up nicely anymore, but I do my face, I do my hair. I have these rituals that I have to stick to. Otherwise, it's just like complete chaos.
Well, God bless you. I can't motivate myself to do that. I think I told you this already, but I put on makeup and like wore a real shirt for the only time during this whole Corona bullshit a week ago. And that's only because we had a meeting with like the president of our company that like I will never have another meeting with him again. I'm like, I should probably wear makeup, I guess.
Yeah, we're both situated in like hotspot areas in the US in terms of the virus. So it's like no living vicariously through one another. We're both like stuck at home, just chewing our way through every piece of Netflix content available.
Seriously. We'll get to that later. Yeah, it's honestly, it kind of sucks because it's such a drag because there's no other news that's really happening that matters. So whenever you just open up like any social media or news, it's only about coronavirus bullshit.
Yeah.
But like also I feel drug addicted because I'm like, I get depressed by it, and yet I'm out, like seeking out more information about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like constantly on it, just looking for the first signs of it's over, and you're like, go back to normal.
Good luck
like
with
every
that.
day, I'm just like Google News, refresh. Show me the like coronavirus over by May or June news, because that's all I'm living for right now.
Dude, I mean, I hope you're right. Because, you know, I'm trying to get married in August.
Yeah, oh my God.
Yeah.
I just like that's like really far away, but still with all this stuff, it's like not that far away.
It's super depressing. I mean, I think you got the email that we sent to all our guests, but it's like, even though it's super far away, August, because there's no end in sight to this thing, it also, you don't know if it's really that far away, because if the virus doesn't go away till like July or early August or whatever, like that's definitely going to bleed into it. But also I feel like there's more likely a scenario where the virus dies down in May or so, but people are just still paranoid, and then a bunch of my guests just still don't come because they're paranoid, which sucks.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, this bitch is getting married in August. She's having a fancy event in Spain, which is going to be amazing. So hopefully the coronavirus goes away so we can all have a freaking fiesta.
Thanks, Jessie. Well, just to curb that back, I'm not a rich bitch or anything. This thing is small. It's like less than 80 people. And also Spain sounds glamorous, but it is cheaper to do your wedding abroad than it is in America. And also my fiance is Spanish, so this is not just a whimsical bullshit.
All true things. It doesn't make it less fabulous.
That's true. Thank you. Well, what else? What else have you know, what else is new? How's Juniper? What's going on?
Yeah, so my cat is like the only person that I talk to every day. He's gone really, really moody over the last few days because I don't feed him until specific times of the day, and he doesn't like that, and he's very vocal in his protests. The other day, he was very upset at me and swatted my head while I was doing a workout. And his claws got stuck in my hair, which is now tied up in a bun, like when I do actual stuff, because otherwise it's like all over in my face. And his paw got stuck in my hair, and I thought, y'all, this is it for me. Like, I'm done. The cat's gonna claw me to death. Like, goodbye.
How'd you end up freeing yourself?
Thankfully, I just grabbed his paw and pulled it out of my hair, and he was nice enough to let me do that. But yes, this is like kind of the most exciting social interactions that I have on the daily. Other than that, I'm mostly just trying to like cook new things. Honestly, this is like the most healthiest I've eaten for like an extended period of time for a while, because I'm just at home and I have time, and so I can like actually cook stuff now. So I've just been doing like lots of healthy salads and like basic proteins and veggies and fruits and stuff like that, which I think is good for me at least. So I can at least come out of quarantine looking hot and fresh and healthy.
You will. Yeah, I feel like all of my friends have been saying the same thing. Like people who don't usually cook, like Karen, who is our other best friend of 1 million years. She never cooks, and now she's cooking. She and her husband are cooking all the time because you have to.
Well, it's also fun, right? Like if you run out of things to do, like you just pull up a recipe on All Recipes or whatever, and you're just like, all right, cool, I'm gonna do this bitch tonight. Like I have no idea how to cook this, but I'm gonna try it. Like you have nothing else to do, really.
Yeah. Cookbook recommendation that is not specifically tied to quarantine time, but Ramona and I have been moving heavily into the Morimoto everyday Japanese cookbook that we bought like, I don't know, maybe 6 months or even more ago because, okay, well, for the rest of you, Ramona and I lived in Japan for 2 months. I was able to convince my job back in the day to let me do a short rotation in Asia. And so we had that really unique experience. But when we came back from eating all that amazing, legit food in Japan and came back to this, we're like, maybe we should just cook it ourselves. So we've been cooking we probably cook like 90% of the recipes in there, and it's all real good. So I would recommend it.
Cool. So for all of the people listening to SF, where do you get all of your cooking materials from?
You mean like the ingredients and stuff?
Yes.
Nijiya. It's the main Japanese supermarket in Japantown, and it has everything.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. We go probably like every 2 weeks.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. The thematic topic for today is how you define your identity, which is the, backbone of this podcast, but which is why we felt like we should start here. So, Jessie, how do you define your identity?
Wow, that's like a really difficult question from the bat. I would say if someone stopped me on the street and asked me how I identify, I would tell them that my parents are from Taiwan, but I was born in California, and that I'm also gay. And I think those are probably like the most salient points of identity for me. Like if someone were to just be like, how do you identify? But I think that's really tricky because it's something that I've never really thought about a lot of outside of those kind of pretty umbrella ideas or terms for identity.
Yeah.
So that's how I think about it from like the very, very high level. What about you?
I think that makes sense. A lot of the same stuff for me, although I think I have like a different order of operations in my head, and then probably a few other things that I naturally associate with my identity that I'm not sure I'm like happy about doing. So for sure, core piece of my identity I always think about is American. I'm like very proudly American. And I think for me, Taiwanese, because I'm also Taiwanese, comes secondary. I like, it's obviously a big part of my identity, but because we were both born in America, it just feels like this is my home country, and Taiwan is like a big part of who I am because it's part of the DNA of my family, but it comes secondary for me. And then because I feel like as like being a privileged, heterosexual person, my sexuality doesn't really come into play for me when I think of identity, because for better for worse in society, I'm just like the default normal, right? So it doesn't come into play for me. The other piece of identity that unfortunately I've always thought about since we graduated college is like my work being a big part of how I identify myself, which is probably pretty evident given that even in our introduction, like the 3 things I said, one of them was like marketing or and it's something that I've been trying to get away from, especially in the last year. I think since who I am shouldn't be defined by what my job is, and yet I think for me it is a big part of how I define myself, which I'm not sure happy about.
Well, I think you brought up two really interesting points. I mean, the first is like how we were different in prioritizing our identities. And I will say that I also, like, if you ask me what my nationality is, obviously I'm from the United States, but a lot of the times the question about identity, and particularly your ethnic identity, prompts you to say that, you know, I'm Taiwanese or I'm Chinese or I'm whatever, versus over what, you know, where you were born. And it's interesting that you say that, because I think that's one of the interesting things about identity is that, like, you define it yourself, but also other people define it for you, whether you want that or not.
Totally. And actually, to that point, and this is a perfect tie-in to the title of our podcast, but so the point of like you making your own identity, but sometimes you having to like adjust the way you answer based on how other people provoke you, right?
Like so much, girl.
I wasn't so aware of being Asian until I studied abroad in college. And funny enough, I studied abroad in Spain. But there it was like every day I just got called like China, Chinita on the street without any conversation with that person, just like across the street being yelled at. So it just like constantly reminded me what I was. And I distinctly remember being in a club or something, because I was, 20 years old, but being in a club and some guy came up to me and in Spanish, he asked me like, where are you from? And I said, I was from New York. Cause at the time I had been living in New York for like 6 years or whatever. And he was like, no, where are you really from? And I was like, fuck you, man. I told you it was New York.
That's like one of the most like offensive and annoying questions to ever hear from somebody, like after you've already told them like where you are from.
Now getting into our upbringing, right? And how that also affects our identities. I mean, I've had so many arguments with my parents, especially my mom, about like my identity in terms of being American first and Taiwanese second, because that's how I see it, because I grew up in America. And like one of the funniest and most bizarre arguments we had one time was I referred to Irvine, which is where Jesse and I were both from, Irvine, California.
Fabulous suburb. Fabulous. So amazing.
But yeah, I referred to Irvine as my hometown, and my mom got like really pissed at me, and she was like, your hometown is Taipei, Taiwan. And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm not from Taipei. And she was so mad and very serious, and she was like, your hometown is wherever your mom grew up or like was born or whatever. I was like, what are you talking about? So I was like, so when I have kids, their hometown will be Irvine, California? And she's like, yeah. Like, what are you talking about?
I did not expect her to concede to that point. I would have expected her to be like, it's Taipei, Taiwan.
Forever. Yeah. I mean, she'll probably argue with me on that point when the time actually comes.
Well, yeah, we'll see. I mean, like, it's so interesting because in a way we have different identities and they're almost like different lives we lead in a sense. Like we have an identity that we embody and portray for our parents in terms of like how we are as Asians, but then we have our own kind of identity and how we portray ourselves to everybody else in the world. Like this is who I am and how I define myself, versus like how our parents see our lives and where they envision our lives to go.
Do you ever feel like, though, sometimes you can't get across what you want to say to your parents? Like for me,
all the time.
I try to keep to, that way that we're supposed to talk to our parents most of the time, but like when I'm getting really pissed at something they're saying and I can't express it fully in Chinese, it just like makes me so mad, and I like just say it anyway in English, and I like I know they don't really understand what I'm saying, and I just
it's really hard though, because like there are some things that there's no way that they could understand in the same manner. Like there are things about their life experience that we could never understand.
Yeah, it's funny because as we grow up, I'm like starting to see parts of my parents and myself. I realized in maybe the last, honestly, like 2 weeks, maybe because I'm with Ramon now, that like I have a person that I'm talking to all the time and is hearing all my stories over and over and over again. But I'll be like, oh, have I told you about that time? And he'll be like, yes, you've told me like 80 times. And I can't help but think that that's exactly what my dad does. Like he tells the same story, the same like 5 stories 1 million times, as if you've never heard them. So I randomly just thought about that. But the story I was going to tell about him, which is like to the point of like, you know, we were just raised so differently and like had such different lives, is whenever he either feels like we're being kind of spoiled brats or privileged, or specifically in the context of when we're eating at a buffet. And we kind of like give him shit for like grabbing all the crab legs on a plate.
A bitch loves a buffet.
He'll always tell the same story about like how poor he was growing up, because both my parents are one of like 5 children, so they had a ton of siblings that their parents had to provide for. And he always tells me the story about like when they were at their poorest, they couldn't afford to have him have anything else for lunch except for half of a boiled egg. So he like tells that story all the time to guilt us, to be like, so I deserve this, or like you don't know how good you've had it, which is totally fair and true, but also goes to like how it's so hard to relate, because that's a whole different kind of life, you know?
Yeah. And honestly, something like, have you ever talked to your parents about like identity specifically and like how they identify? Because, you know, one of the things that I think is difficult to talk to our parents about, at least for me, is that they don't question their identity, right? Like what you were saying, like your mom was saying, like, you know, you're Taiwanese from Taipei, Taiwan. They don't have any, you know, second guesses about where they're from, like where their roots are. They're very, very, very clear on that. Versus like where we stand, it's not so clear, right? We have some ethnic roots based off of where our parents are from, but like we are pretty firmly grounded in the United States and what all of that entails.
Yeah, I've never had that real conversation with my parents, except when we argued about the hometown bit. But yeah, I agree. I don't think they have a question at all in their minds. Part of that, I think, is because they, you know, they grew up in one country, which happens to be the exact same country as their ethnic origin, right? So that's not that questionable for them. But I also think it has to do with just like, in general, Asian culture and like society, in terms of there's this kind of like, I don't really want to say the word obedience, but like there is some feeling of like, you know, the way you're supposed to act based on what that society has taught you is the right way to act. And in Asian countries in particular, right, it's like you don't question your place in society. Like, you know, if you're the man, that like you were supposed to like provide for the family. If you're the woman, you're gonna raise the child, or at least back in like parents' day, right? So I feel like there's also part of that, because whenever I have had like harder conversations with my parents about like their relationship, or like, you know, more serious topics, the answer I get back a lot is like, well, there's no way. That's not even possible. Because, you know, like there's no choice in it. It's just they know where they're supposed to be, the way they're supposed to act. And there's no way to go against that.
100%. Like there's this feeling of conformity versus individuality.
That's a way better word than obedience. Yes.
You know, active listening, okay?
Yes.
But I find that so interesting because part of why they came to America and why we're here is kind of a pursuit of individuality, of separation from that conformity to find something different. And for me, I feel like I've always struggled with that like tension because they want you to, my parents want me to conform in some aspects, but be very exceptional or individualistic in other aspects. And it causes a lot of like personal drama because you're like trying to be your own person, but at the same time, like your parents don't want you to be that person in specific aspects of it, but they're fine with other aspects of it. So it's very, very a confusing way to construct your identity growing up because some things are acceptable and some things are not, but you never know what they are because they don't talk about identity and they don't talk about how identity is constructed for them because it's always been this static, like non-changing thing.
Yes. All I could think of when you were saying that was like they want the best of both worlds, right? Like we're the ones that live in the two worlds. They're not the ones.
You want your cake and you want to eat it too.
You know, I've always had a problem with that thing because it's kind of like, why the fuck do you have a cake if you're not going to eat it?
Maybe it's a cake for somebody else, okay? It's a birthday cake.
Then it's not your cake. It's someone else's cake.
Oh my God.
But yes.
But like, so how do you feel like that's shaped how you have approached your life? Like this kind of tension that you carry with you throughout like the different formative periods of your life. What do you feel like, how do you feel like that's like affected you?
I feel like it's affected me in that, especially when I was growing up, so like high school, right? Like when you first start understanding what your personality is and like growing into yourself, in the most awkward part of your life. I feel like I had to fight my parents tooth and nail on everything that I wanted, especially as I was getting closer to leaving for college, right? So like in sophomore or junior years when you start really thinking about college and start like getting into applications and whatever. And for me, I wanted to go down a really like untraditional route for an Asian kid, which is that I wanted to pursue something in the music business. So like not me playing the violin on stage, you know, being the next Yo-Yo Ma or whatever, but like me wanting to work at a record label and like help promote artists, which is totally unheard of. That's not what I do today. You know, it was a part of my life at some point, but like to get there, I felt like I had to justify myself all the time to my parents of like, how can this dream still make sense within the expectations that you have for me of like, there's this just constant underlying guilt of I like went through all the struggle to bring you to this country so that you could succeed and have a better life than I did. So you better not fuck this up. And so to like go after this so like seemingly like flittering dream that's not going to make any money, how was I going to make that like sustainable and something that could still fulfill the having a better life than they did check mark that they needed. I think that was like the biggest milestone that I first came across of like how that their upbringing of me shaped the way that I had to like carry myself in life, which was just like learning to fight for what I want and make what I want a reality more than ever, which I guess in retrospect is like a really good thing that they they forced me to learn, right? Which they didn't plan for, but
like it drove you in a way to be more persistent in what you wanted because of all of that kind of pressure and doubt about whether or not what you were looking to do would be successful. Yeah.
How about you?
I definitely feel the same way. I think it was also, you know, like I think my parents had a lot of academic expectations for me, and a lot of the times it would be very difficult because, to be honest, like there was nothing that I was particularly interested in high school. And then when it comes to the whole like acceptable success, like what your parents think is acceptable for you, I also had the same experience kind of going to college. Side note, I did follow Angela to New York to go to NYU, but I made the decision all by myself, so no shade there. But yeah, like, you know, it was so funny because I felt like I worked my ass off through high school. Like, I did a bunch of AP classes, I did extracurriculars. I really was like pedal to the metal trying to get to the colleges that I wanted to get into. And one of the colleges I wanted to get into was New York University. And I kind of, at the end of the process, when I got the letter, I was like so happy and excited. And part of that was kind of tempered because like I knew my parents weren't as excited because they wanted me to stay close to home and go to a local university. And this is like one of those interesting tensions because for me, I wouldn't have had to work so hard to get into local university, right? I could have kind of just cruised and made it. So it was one of those situations where it's like you're aiming for like the highest level of success, but they kind of wanted me to just kind of settle with what was there, what was in the plan. And obviously, like you, I came to the same conclusion. And I was like, fuck it. I'm not going to settle. Like, I just worked my butt off to get to the school that I really wanted to go to. I'm going to go there.
Yeah. I think you and I are very similar, which is like no surprise that we've had some similar milestones in life and like have remained such close friends for so long. But I'm sure this is something that a lot of Asian American people have dealt with, which is like finding your place amongst the heavy expectations that your parents have set for you.
Yeah, 100%. And you know what? We're like talking about high school and stuff. Like, how do you feel like you have changed? Like, how your identity has changed? Like, from high school to college, where you are now.
Girl, don't even.
I cannot. Tell me all about the emo phase, the bangs,
yes, girl,
eyeliner, everything.
I don't have to tell you. You lived through it with
Tell
me.
our listeners.
We have so many MySpace photos that I wish could be burned forever, but they're on the internet for life, unfortunately. Yeah. Okay, well, high school in and of itself, I think I went through like 3 different phases of my identity. Coming into high school backtracking even further, middle school, I was like, that was when I had, I would say, my like deepest Asian pride phase, where I was like,
oh my god, yes, I remember. You watched like Meteor Garden and you wrote stuff in Chinese.
Meteor Garden, F4 for anyone who was all up in that business. So I was like super Asian in middle school, and then I was transitioning out of that into high school because of the 4 high schools in Irvine. I went to the whitest high school. So I think that definitely played into how I wanted to like be perceived by people, which is like, oh, I was just like super Asian all the time, but now I'm at this really white school. I should probably tone that down. Right? Like when you're 14 and you're just like, you want everyone to like you, you're not gonna be true to yourself. You're gonna be like, how do I adapt so that I can like be as likable as possible? So that was like the beginning. And then when I discovered music and I thought I wanted to get into the music business for the first time, I was like 15, which, you know, go me that I was even like thinking about a career when I was 15. But
I did not even know that was like a career option when I was 15. So like, hats off to you.
TBH, I didn't either until, I don't know if you remember this or you did this as well, but our career counselors in high school gave us this like thick ass book that was thicker than a phone book that was like every potential career you could have in your life. And there was like 1 sentence dedicated to like music business. I'm like, yes, this is it. But anyways, that's when I went through my emo phase. I was like, I wore all black, which I don't think is really indicative because if you live in New York, all your wardrobe's black anyway. But wore all black, had like heavy eyeliner, had really crazy hair with like 50,000 layers in it, and went to all the Battle of the Band concerts. Yes, that was a fun phase. And then I went totally opposite in senior year and went super preppy, like, preppy's not, I don't know if it's preppy, but I went like really deep on American Apparel and was like trying to
I remember that.
go that route. Yeah. And then college was just a clusterfuck all around, man. I don't think I knew who I was at any point in college until maybe the last stretch of college.
I feel you. Like, do I know who I am now? I don't know. I don't know.
Even now?
It's clearer, but it's like a Monet. It looks nice from far away. And then you get close and you're like, this is just a bunch of weird colors, like, dotted together.
That's fair. I definitely don't have all my shit together now either, but I feel like I'm way more secure in myself now than I was growing up, or even through like my early 20s. God damn, that was a messy, like blurry phase of my life as well.
We're still in our 20s.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. What is it? March? I'm 4 months away from being 30, so sorry.
Still 20s.
Ugh, barely. But early 20s, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Early 20s, like, you had no idea what you're doing with your life.
For sure.
Well, speaking of younger times, now that you have a better sense of self, if you could be in the same room as baby boy Jesse, like middle school, freshman year, high school Jesse, who's like doesn't know who the F he is or what to think of himself, what advice would you give him about like finding himself and feeling more secure in who he is?
Yeah, I mean, like I just said, I still don't really necessarily know who I am, but I think that as I've gotten older, I've just gotten more comfortable with that unknown. And I think you can never really figure out who you are. Like, there's always going to be parts of you where like, why did I do that? Or why did I say that? Why do I think these things? So I think the advice that I would give to my younger self is just be more comfortable with the fact that there are going to be parts of you that you don't understand, and that you don't need to necessarily conform to like one shape or group or way. There was like a lot of struggle. Like, I struggled a lot to try to like place myself. And I think my advice to my younger self would be, don't do that. Like, because you don't necessarily know like where you feel one day versus the other. Like, just try to enjoy the best parts of each identity the best that you can. What about yourself?
That's good. Yeah, it's something I've been reflecting a lot on recently too, because I'm, like you're saying, I'm also still trying to figure out my life. but a big part that's like probably my biggest question mark is more like career pathing and what's going to bring me joy in the long term there. But as I was reflecting on that, one of the things that came up a lot was like how much I value what other people think of me, which like I shouldn't. Like, who the fuck cares? So I think my biggest piece of advice to myself back then is like, no one else knows who they are either. So like, stop trying so hard to impress them, because like they're not better than you. You know what I mean? Like, everyone's in their own little clusterfuck world that like, so who cares?
And
you'll figure it out. They're figuring it out.
And it's hard because you never see it, right? Like, everyone projects like the best version of themselves to the world. And so you're like looking over there and be like, that bitch is doing so good right now. What the fuck? But yeah, like you said, in reality, everybody is going through probably some really serious struggles about like who they are, how they feel, what they're doing.
Yeah. That reminds me, because like a really easy like default part of me that I fall back to, which I'm trying to curb now, is like being super judgmental about people, because it's so easy to be judgy, right, of people. But something that I have been trying to take more to heart recently is like the saying of, you know, like, no one knows what's going on in someone else's life except that person, right? So like, have a little bit more empathy there, right? So So to that end, like whether that's from a positive way of looking at someone's life or a negative way, like you have no idea what's happening under the hood. So don't make assumptions.
Yeah.
You know.
No, I agree. Although I reserve the right to be petty and judgmental.
You know, I didn't say I'm not petty and judgmental. I said I'm trying to be less. Okay, thinking about your identity, what's the biggest thing that's shaped your sense of who you are?
So not to be like a big stereotype, but definitely being gay has been like the biggest shaper of my identity and the biggest like still unknown of my identity, because I think that when I first started to understand that I was gay, the media portrayal of what it meant to be LGBT made me think that there was this like accepting, welcoming community that would just like envelop me as soon as I came out of the closet and like, I'm fucking gay. And the truth is that it's not. And something that is, I think, really not discussed is that community requires that you have to input into the community. So like I had the wrong kind of conception about it. I thought the community would come to me, would bring me into it, help me understand how to navigate it. And that's kind of a big fault of mine, because it's a give and take, like all relationships. Like you have to put into the community, you have to find the right people for you. And so I think that that's been such a struggle, because I've bounced around kind of different groups of people trying to find my tribe within this kind of rainbow umbrella group of people. And that's something that I'm still working on today.
That is a really good answer.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I don't know that I have a single answer. I mean, it also sounds cliche and also in the context of this podcast, but I do think one of the bigger things that's shaped my identity is just like this being kind of stuck in the middle of being Asian and being American, because I feel like if there is one consistent thing tied to identity that's been throughout my life, it is just kind of like the need to feel like I have to justify myself on either end of the spectrum of like, you know, when I talk to my parents, like the guilt I have when I like forget how to say some stuff in Chinese because I haven't been practicing Chinese with anyone, or versus then when I'm in like a setting where I'm only with like white friends, then sometimes I just like, I don't feel like I feel a little out of place, even though they're not doing anything to make me feel uncomfortable, but it's just like I look around and notice that I'm the only one that looks different, and it starts getting to me. So I do feel like being this like bicultural self has been one of the biggest shapers of how I continue to see my identity and how I interact.
That's a really good point. I mean, I feel like with all these things related to identity, there's always like this kind of tension of like you belong, but then you don't belong.
All right, so let's get to some fun stuff to close. We want to introduce you to our fortune cookie segment.
It's our way to end the podcast with a sweet treat where you never know what you're going to get.
Given that we are stuck inside all day, every day, naturally, I'm sure everyone is maxing out their Netflix bandwidth. So let's talk about what content you're binging right now. Jessie, take it away.
Okay, I've watched like so many things, so there's like not a one thing. But I just want to say that, okay, and this happened kind of before the corona, but I just want to throw it out there because I think it's awesome. The second season of Sabrina, love, super adore. Aunt Zelda, frickin' icon. Like, she is like icon every single frickin' scene. Sabrina, still extremely insufferable. I'm like,
dude, she's so annoying.
I know. I'm like, was I that bad when I was a teenager? Like, thank God Jesus did not give me magical powers.
Oh my God. But wait, are you talking about season 2 or are you talking about season 3? Isn't there a third season right now?
No, I think it was like season 1, then there was like Crises special, and then continuation, and then season 2. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so much stuff happens to Sabrina in in season 2. She's like a cheerleader. She's also, spoiler alert, Queen of Hell. She's like trying to mac on like multiple boys. Like she's just trying to have it all, which I can completely relate to, but I feel like I would approach it in a more like methodical and logical way than how she's doing it.
Well, she's like 16 or whatever, supposedly.
I feel like I was more logical and methodical when I was 16, but that being said...
That's because you Asian, girl.
But that being said, I love Kyun and Shipka. I love the rest of the cast. Like, it's so fun. It's like horror. It's campy. Like, it's just so amusing. So, like, if you haven't watched it yet, you should definitely watch it. I love it. What about you?
Yeah, and if you're a fan of the old Sabrina, it's like totally different.
Yeah, completely different.
Yet hails to the same like character structure that you'll have a bit of nostalgia, right? Okay, well, at the moment, I wouldn't call it binging. I think I'm finally making my way through all the like Oscar nominees right now. So like the other night we watched The Irishman, and by the other night I mean 3 nights, because that thing's fucking like 4 hours long, and there's no way I'm gonna watch that all in one go. And then last night I then in turn made Ramon watch Two Popes because I wanted to watch that. I did not want to watch Irishman. So anyways, we're making our way through the nominees, and I think I'll watch Marriage Story.
Oh my god, so good. I watched it. You should watch it. Yeah.
Get ready to cry.
Get ready to definitely feel some way after you watch it. I didn't cry, but I definitely felt like some way after I watched it. So tell us what you guys are watching. You can email us and let us know what you're watching and what your thoughts are at telluswhereyou'refrom@gmail.com. That's your YOURE and not YOUR, grammar freaks.
Yes. Yeah, tell us what you're watching, or tell us what you think about the topic that we talked about today, which is, how you identify yourself, how you define that, and how your identity has been shaped throughout your years. We'd love to hear from you.
Until next time, 再见
bitches.
Peace.